Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of this lesson. In this video, we are going to make a few final privacy changes, and then after that, we will learn about general security when you're letting users submit data into your database. Without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Alright, so here I am on the My Notes page, logged in with my subscriber account, and you might have noticed that if you refresh the page and then scroll down to see your existing notes, the titles are now prefaced with the word private. And we don't want this because I think it looks very odd. So let's make it our goal to remove the private colon before the titles. And it's worth pointing out that the titles do not actually contain the word private at the beginning, as we can see from our admin dashboard, but rather this is just how WordPress chooses to display the title on the front end. So we do not need to actually manipulate the title value itself. We just want to change the way that it gets displayed in our front end template. Now there are many different ways of achieving this, but let me show you how I would do it. So right now, jump into your text editor, and within your theme folder, I want you to open up page-mynotes.php. And let's scroll down until we see the list item that gets generated once for each note post. And this first input is for the title of the post, and we want to change its value. So at the moment, we are echoing out the results of get the title, and we are running that through escape attribute just for security, and that's what's giving us the private colon and then the actual title. So what I'm going to do is run this text through a PHP tool that will let me manipulate it. So right now, go ahead and select the escape attribute and the get the title. Select up until the closing parenthesis, but before the semicolon, and cut that into your clipboard. Okay, and then in its place, let's call a PHP tool named str, which stands for string, and then underscore replace. And that's a function, so open up a pair of parentheses. And on my screen right now, I know the line is breaking in a really awkward place, but within these parentheses, we want to have 3 arguments. So just as a placeholder, I will say A, B, and C. And this string replace function lets us manipulate a string of text. Now the third and final argument is the text that you want to begin with, or that you want to manipulate. So instead of the placeholder C, let's just paste in our clipboard, right? Because this is the text that we want to work with. Okay, and then the first argument is a string of text that you want to search for within this text. And then the second argument is what you want to replace this with. So let me show you how we can leverage this. Instead of the placeholder A, let's say quotes, and then private colon space, because that is the exact string of text that we want to get rid of. Okay? Now the second argument is what we want to replace this with. So instead of the placeholder B, let's say quotes, and we could replace it with unicorn or whatever we want, but instead, let's just replace it with a completely empty pair of quotes. So replace this with absolutely nothing, which basically means just remove it. Okay, so if we go ahead and save that, and then refresh our front end, perfect. Okay, now that we've taken care of that, we can change gears. Now before we learn about general security when it comes to letting visitors fill out form fields and save the data to your database, before we get to that, there's one last thing I want to cover when it comes to our subscriber role permissions. So right now I want you to jump back into the window where you are logged in as the admin, and let's go edit the subscriber role. So under the sidebar users menu, click on roles, and then let's edit the subscriber role. Let's click on the notes tab, and we no longer need to grant the subscriber the ability to delete published notes or edit published notes. Because now that we've set things up so that note posts will always be private, that means they will never actually be considered published. So we can actually go ahead and uncheck this, delete published notes, and uncheck edit published notes. Cool. So now you should only have these 3 capabilities checked: edit notes, publish notes, and delete notes. I only bring this up because I'm a big fan of only giving the absolute minimum number of capabilities to a role that you don't really trust. Okay, so let's go ahead and update this. And we can jump back to the window where we are logged in as a subscriber. And just as a test, we could try to edit one of our posts. So change the title to edited new privacy test and edit text here. Click save. Cool. So that edit request was successful, and then we could even try to delete the post. And that's successful as well. Okay, now let's finally move on and change topics, and let's talk about general security best practices when you have a situation where you're letting strangers type in information and potentially save it into your database. So first, I want to show you an absolute worst case nightmare, and then we can learn how to prevent it and even how to have backup protection and even backup for our backup protection, so we have multiple layers of security in place. Okay, but first, let's start with the worst possible scenario, our worst nightmare, which is someone comes to your website and maybe in this body field, instead of actually taking notes in their class, if they are a malicious user, they might try to include a bit of JavaScript. So script tags, and then in between the tags, they could say alert, hello. Now, an alert pop-up message in and of itself is not harmful, but the idea here is that if we are able to execute any JavaScript whatsoever, that is a huge security gap. So a lot of times when you see people testing the security of their own site, they will often use an alert pop-up message as a proof of concept. Because if you're able to execute this, you'd also be able to execute malicious JavaScript. Okay, anyways, let's go ahead and save this note. And right away we see good news. We see that those opening and closing script tags were deleted, which will prevent this code from actually being executed as JavaScript. And this is excellent. WordPress is actually very secure right out of the box. The reason that it removed those opening and closing script tags for us is because by default, only admin accounts are allowed to post unfiltered HTML. So back in the window where you're logged in as the admin, in the user's menu sidebar, if you click on roles, and then click on subscriber to begin editing or viewing it, you'll notice that in the general tab, there is a capability named unfiltered HTML. And thankfully, because the creators of WordPress are very intelligent, this option is unchecked. The ability to post unfiltered HTML that can contain JavaScript is such a powerful capability that not even the editor role or the author role are allowed to have it. Only the administrator can ever post unfiltered HTML. And that's the way that we want to keep things, because this feature alone gives our site a nice basis of security. However, what if one of your admins goes rogue? Or what if someone guesses your admin password or somehow gains access to your admin account? Well, let's test that out. So let's jump to the front end while we are logged in as our admin. And let's go over to My Notes. And let's create a note, give it a title of Hack Test. And for the body, let's create a script tag and closing script. In the middle, say alert, hi, close it. Okay, and if we try to create that note, we see some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that WordPress did not automatically remove the opening and closing script tags, but the good news is that it still did not actually execute as JavaScript. And we can thank our escape functions for that. Let me show you what I mean. So back in our text editor, within page mynotes.php, within the li list item that gets generated once for each note post, here's the text area that represents the body content. And you'll remember that we wrapped get the content within escape attr. Now we are starting to see why these escape functions are so important. For example, follow along with me. Maybe up at the very top of this list item element, let's drop into PHP just as a quick test and echo out get the content. Notice that we are not wrapping it within any escape functions. So if we save this and refresh our front end, there is the alert pop-up. This means that the JavaScript actually executed. And instead of a pop-up, it could have been malicious code that sends your private data to a third-party server somewhere, or that tries to force your computer to download a virus or malware or something terrible. So back in our code, this is why it's so important to wrap user-generated content within escape functions. Now, WordPress has a whole bunch of different escape functions for different situations. So in just a general HTML sense, if we wanted to wrap this within a paragraph element, the escape function that we could use is escape_HTML. So open the parenthesis, close the parenthesis sandwich here. And now if I save that and refresh, cool, you can see that the JavaScript does not actually execute. The code gets converted or escaped into plain text, so that the browser no longer recognizes it as actual HTML or JavaScript. Now, like I said, there are different escape functions for different scenarios. Let's go ahead and delete this entire test paragraph block up here and walk through a couple examples of escape functions. So on this input that's designed for our title, you can see that we are using escape attribute, because within this context, it's being used as the actual value for an HTML attribute. And down on our text area, we can actually improve things a little bit by, instead of using escape attr, instead of that, we can use escape_text area. The idea is that WordPress will use slightly different strategies to convert the code into plain text. So there was escape HTML, escape attr, escape text area. You just want to use the right one in the right context, because hackers have all sorts of different tricks up their sleeves. For example, within our text area body field, they might try to trick the web browser by beginning with a closing text area tag and then including malicious code. Or on a regular input like we have up here, they might try to begin with closing quotes to try and trick the browser into thinking that's the closing quote for the value attribute, and then include malicious code. Anyways, the point here is that hackers have all sorts of tricks up their sleeves, but the super intelligent folks that created WordPress have already taken care of it. All we need to do is use the appropriate escape function at the appropriate time. However, some of you might be scratching your head right now and saying, well, what about our blog posts and our professor pages and our campus pages? Do we need to use the escape HTML function for that content? The answer is that it depends. Most of the time you will not want to do that because that will prevent you from using any sort of HTML within the body content field. It's really just up to you and how much you trust your admin users or how likely you think it is that one of your accounts would be breached. The big point for this lesson is that I just want you to be aware of the ability to escape fields if and when necessary. Alright, now before we bring this lesson to a close, there's one more topic I want to cover where we even further restrict what subscriber accounts are allowed to do. So right now, let's jump back into the browser window where we are logged in with a subscriber account. And I want to point out that even though subscribers are not allowed to post unfiltered HTML, by default, they are allowed to post basic HTML. So for the title, I will say subscriber HTML test. And for the body content, we can try a script again. And we know that that will fail. WordPress will prevent that from working. But below that, maybe we want to include an unordered list. And within that, we would include a list item and say hello 1. And then maybe we have a few of those, right? Hello 2, hello 3, or maybe down here we would have a paragraph and say this text is bold, right? And the bold would be wrapped in a strong tag. You get the idea. So if we go ahead and create this note, you'll notice that the script tags surrounding this were removed, but WordPress did indeed allow us to post basic HTML. Now, it's not actually rendering as HTML, but that's only because we've set this to be the value for a text area field. If we go into the WordPress admin area and check out that newly created note, I'm currently in text mode, but if I switch to visual mode, you can see that that subscriber user was successful in saving basic HTML into the database. Now, a lot of times that's going to be completely harmless, but I want to be very strict with my subscriber accounts, and I don't even want to let them post basic HTML like this. So let's go ahead and delete this post, and I want to show you how we can enforce a really strict policy on the server side that strips out any and all HTML as well as any other potentially malicious code. So right now, jump back into your text editor, and I want you to open up functions.php, and we can scroll down to the very bottom. Remember, in our previous lesson, we set up this filter named makeNotePrivate, and within the body of this function, maybe right above this if statement, why don't we create another if statement? So if parentheses curly brackets, and this time around we only need one condition check. Let's just make sure that this post is of the note post type. So if data post type equals note, if that's true, then within the if statement, let's manipulate data's property named post content, and I want to strip out any and all HTML from this value before we save it into the database. Remember that that's what this filter is allowing us to do. We're intercepting a request right before the data gets saved into the database. So I want to change the post content. So I'm going to set this to equal, and then there's a WordPress function named sanitize text area field, semicolon at the end, and within these parentheses, you just tell it what you want to sanitize. So I'm literally just going to copy and paste this data post content value. So copy that into my clipboard, paste it into these parentheses. So whatever the user is trying to submit, I just want to sanitize it. So we've modified the post content, and then remember, down at the bottom of this function, we return that data. This is the water that's exiting our filter. And before we save this, we could do the same thing with our title field. So we could just duplicate this line, copy and paste it, and say we want post title, and then instead of sanitize text area field, WordPress has a function named sanitize text field. And let's also change post content here to post title. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. And now back in the window where we are logged in as a subscriber, let's try to create another new note. So maybe this post is amazing. And maybe I would try to wrap the word amazing in a strong tag. And then in the body content, this is a test. And then on a new line, maybe try to create a heading test, maybe a list item. You get the idea. Let's go ahead and try to create that. Cool, and you can see that WordPress stripped out all of that basic HTML. And you can call me strict, but I like this. I don't want to let users that I don't really trust post anything even close to HTML on my website or into my database. And that's going to bring this lesson to a close. Now, some of you might be scratching your head saying, was all of this security talk really necessary considering that the My Notes page is private? Right, because even if someone did enter a cross-site scripting JavaScript attack, they would be the only ones that could view it because it's private. And while that might be true, when it comes to security, you can never have enough layers of protection. So now, even if something super weird happens and people can somehow view other people's private notes, I'm not sure how that would happen, but even if it did somehow, we have basic security in place. Okay, now in our next lesson, we are going to learn how to set up per user post limits. So that way someone can't come to our site and try to create 50 million notes in an attempt to fill up our database or make our website really slow. So let's keep things rolling, and I will see you then.